We're looking here at Aristotle's Poetics, section 1. I want to try to explain some of the concepts so that you can understand it when you're reading it, to get some of the complex ideas, to understand some of the language. First of all, here we're looking at his definition of poetry. He says it's deeply rooted in human nature and the propensity of humans to imitate, and also our sensibility for rhythm. Okay, and so you could think of poetry as rhythmic imitation. I'll talk more about what he means by that. He also looks at three different types of poetry: the tragedies, the comedies, and the epics were all poems, and they were all in rhythm, so they used the meters that Aristotle talks about. For the Greeks, tragedies really are serious plays. They don't necessarily have to end badly, although Aristotle prefers ones that do. Comedies are often kind of madcap, strange, irreverent in Athens. Okay, and then epics are things like the Iliad and the Odyssey, big long stories focused on heroes. And for Aristotle, the meter, the poetic meter that's chosen is important here. And one of the ways we can think about this is that even in English poetry, there's going to be, sometimes anyway, a use of meter that signals a certain type of mood. Okay, so the type I'm thinking of here is a limerick. Okay, limericks are oftentimes silly, and they have a certain rhythm and form to them, and that is to go, there once was a man, da 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 da. That's a limerick. Okay, and they all sound that way, and they're usually silly. And it would not make sense, say, at a eulogy or a funeral, a eulogy at a funeral or memorial service, to get up and say, I've got a poem to share, and then run off a limerick, because it would be silly. Now, another type of poem might be quite appropriate, but limericks would generally not be appropriate unless it was a very particular kind of eulogy, I suppose. Now, Aristotle's going to talk about different types of meter. In epic, in the Greek epics, there's hexameter, which is a 6-foot type of meter where there's 6 poetic units per line. And then we have comedy, he thinks, is especially suited for the iamb, the da 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 da, and then the tragedies use a number of different type of meters. Okay, so the meter is something that he finds important in conveying a certain mood, a certain signal to the audience about the language that's being used. Okay, now he believes that the most important thing about tragedy is plot. Okay, and he says that plot is the soul of tragedy, and plot imitates action, and so the plot has to be organized well so that people can understand it. And he actually thinks here that, when I'm thinking about plot, that the order in which the events are arranged is important. Of course, there's a beginning, a middle, and an end, as might seem obvious, but they have to make sense together. He talks about magnitude, okay, and here we can think about, it's got to be understandable for the audience. It can't be so big that the audience can't grasp it, in a sense, can't understand it. So we can all probably think of movies we've seen where the director just tried to do too much, and in a sense the scope was too big for the movie really to make sense. Then we can think about unity too, in a sense that there should be some kind of way that all of the events, all of the scenes fit together. And all this helps it to make it understandable for the audience and to make a satisfying story. Complexities here. Aristotle says there are simple plots that can, in a tragedy, go from good fortune to bad fortune without much complexity. He does prefer the complex plots. The two types of complex plot devices that he talks about here are the reversal of the situation, where things seem to be going well, and then they're all of a sudden going badly, and then recognition, where a character recognizes something that really changes the game here, changes the plot. Okay, and he talks about this in more detail in book 2, but here in book 1, or section 1, he mentions the Oedipus, or Oedipus Rex, or Oedipus Tyrannus, the story of Oedipus the king, and where the recognition and the reversal of the situation are brought together in one plot device. And here it's that Oedipus is investigating a murder. He is trying to understand what's happened, and this offhand comment by the man that he's talking to brings home that, one, things are much different than he thought they were. You have a reversal, and he recognizes that recognition, and all of a sudden his fortune has gone from good to bad. Okay, and it is a very skillfully done scene. You may want to check that play out sometime. Okay, now, spectacle, or the spectacular. Aristotle means here something more like we would think of as special effects. Okay, now they don't have the kind of huge special effects budgets and techniques that we have today, but you have things like stage machinery. Okay, and the most famous type of stage machinery is the most famous trick that can be done with stage machinery is the Deus ex machina in Latin, or the God out of the machine. And this is a much bigger scale, I think, than they would have been able to do in this picture here on the right, than they would have been able to do on the stage in ancient Athens. But this is a depiction of, or a picture of, a performance of Medea in Sicily in the 21st century. And here we have the god Helios on top of the wall about to descend. And so there is a god out of the machine, a Deus ex machina. Okay. Now, we should also think about what should we make out of Aristotle's analysis. There's a writer named Gregory Hayes in a Greek play collection called The Greek Plays by Modern Library that talks about this, and that Aristotle's Poetics, because it's so famous, there's it's early on as a work of literary criticism. It's become so much the standard way of looking at tragedy. Okay, Hayes doesn't talk about exactly why, those reasons why it has, but that's part of the reason why it has. So, but there's some limits to what we should be thinking about here. First of all, it's not a comprehensive work. It may have been Aristotle's lecture notes. It's something that was more circulated among Aristotle's followers than it wasn't really a full philosophical treatise here. Okay, and also Aristotle doesn't describe every tragedy in the sense that not all the tragedies go from good to bad. There are some where the main character ends up in a better position in the beginning. So there's the play called Helen, where actually Helen hasn't been kidnapped and gone to Troy. Instead, she is spirited away to Egypt and spends her time there while her phantom double is in Troy, and the Greeks and Trojans spend 10 years fighting for a phantom. And then finally Menelaus comes to Egypt as he shipwrecks there, and they meet up again, and she's able to get out of the terrible situation she's in Egypt, and they end up together again. Okay, it doesn't normally sound like a tragedy, but so if we think about this tragedies as maybe serious plays, drawing almost always on mythology, not always, it doesn't necessarily have to go from good to bad, the plot. So that's important to think about. And so Aristotle has one take on tragedy. It's not the universal guide to tragedies. It's not something that, certainly it is not a manual to tragedy, because he's writing after the age of tragedy that is seen oftentimes as this height of it, where you have Aeschylus and Sophocles and Euripides. Okay, so I think that's just an important thing to think about too, that it's one very influential analysis of it, but it's not the be-all, end-all, and doesn't describe all tragedies. So that's just something to think about as we read it.